Hello and welcome to the Energy Talk podcast presented by Okra Solar. My name is Olubumi Olajide, and I'm so excited to be back with another episode. And for everyone that's new, welcome. And here's a quick introduction about the podcast. The Energy Talk is a platform dedicated to telling the story of sub-Saharan Africa's energy transition, focusing first on the financiers, policymakers, operators, and everyone else in between that is working to close the energy access gap on the continent. Now, for this episode, we will cover the $10 million investment that Crossboundary Energy Access has made into mobile power, a vertically integrated manufacturer and operator looking to scale their battery swap hubs across Africa. We're also privileged to speak with both sides of the deal on this episode. Lynn is the Associate Director of Investment at Crossboundary Energy Access, and Luke is the Chief Operating Officer at Mobile Power. Now, before we get into that conversation, I want to give a big shout out to our partners on this podcast. Okra Solar develops mesh grid technology to get energy access to people in off-grid communities. Mesh grids are interconnected solar home systems and a leading form of rural electrification that provides a high power output at a low cost. If you'd like to learn more, visit okrasolar.com. I'll also have the information in the show notes of this episode. Now, to get into the episode of today. The first voice you will hear now is Lynn's, and she will tell us about how she first got into energy, how she met Luke for the first time, and also how this deal came together. Enjoy.
So I'm an investment professional currently with Crossboundary Access team. But before that, I actually started my career in investment banking. So I was based out of Dubai, doing some mergers and acquisition, leverage finance deals. I then moved to private credit, still based out of Dubai. And then after a while, I wanted to focus my work on sub-Saharan Africa. And so then I moved back home, set up an advisory firm, an investment advisory firm called Decla Capital Advisors. And so the main aim for that firm was just to help small and mid-sized enterprises here to sort of get financing from Middle Eastern investors. And so then my introduction to energy came a bit with Decla Capital, but even before that, I had done a couple of like project finance, energy-centric transactions, even when I was in investment banking, and also quite a bit when I was in private credit. So I joined Crossboundary, I think it's been almost a year and a half now. I currently work as the Associate Director within the Crossboundary Access team, which specifically focuses on investing within the energy access space. And so then started my work with Crossboundary, looking at, from a portfolio-wide perspective, looking at energy access solutions that can be plugged into the continent in a way that, provides affordable electricity to the poorest within the continent, and also just helps us scale this particular space in a way that makes sense. And so my very first, right now, actually within Crossboundary, my role is acting as transaction lead for transactions such as the mobile power deal that we just recently did. And that would typically entail structuring a commercially viable transaction that makes sense for what we expect from an impact and return perspective. Aside from that, I also am quite heavily involved in fundraise. Recently, we just raised $10 million in concessional funding from FDB. I actually spearheaded that particular transaction. And so it's kind of like a full loop where we will raise money from different investors, whether it's pure equity, whether it's concessional capital. We'll raise money from different investors and then identify energy access solutions, be it mini grids, mesh grids, mobile hubs, that allow us to actually put that money to use. And interesting, so I love that you phrased the question, when did I first meet Luke? So within Crossboundary, at least, mobile power was one of the first transactions that I focused on. And so then when I came on board, there were like this exciting new technology that is, being used and providing really good energy or catering to energy needs within rural Nigeria at the moment, but they also have portfolios in other countries. Would be good for you to have a look, see how it fits within our investment mandate and how we can best sort of incorporate that. And so then that was my first introduction to Look, just going into it, talking about different term sheets, talking about how best we can integrate the two business models and finance something that makes sense.
Lynn, to come back to you, so for people who aren't very familiar with cross-boundary energy access, the large part of your previous investments and portfolios have been largely around mini-grid technology, and cross-boundary energy access has been very innovative with the way it's raised and deployed capital in the space. So, when you first learned about mobile power, what was the initial draw to the technology, and how does that complement your current mini-grid portfolios and the work that you've been doing in the off-grid space for the past few years?
That's a good question, Olu. So you're right in that. So historically and even presently, anyone who knows about cross-boundary access knows it as this investment platform that specifically deals in mini grids, for example. So that is very much the case. The capital that we raise it to have it deployed or invested within the energy access space in general. We actually define ourselves as a distributed electric utility. The purpose of that is to always, and this is actually what's expected of us by the investors whom we raise money from. The purpose is for us to continuously search for the most efficient, most cost effective method to electrify what about 600 million people currently within the continent of Africa lack electricity, of whom let's say 300 million people roughly could best or most affordably be electrified through mini grids and other energy access solutions. So then we are not, the beauty of the kind of capital that we raise is that it's flexible. We're not tied to, it has to be that it's a mini grid technology, it has to be a mesh grid technology, because the understanding, even from where we raise capital, is that we have 600 people, 600 million people that are unelectrified at the moment or underserved in some way. So how do we then best fit the needs of these people given a particular situation? So whether we're looking at Nigeria or any other country within Pan Africa, because our mandate cuts across geographically. So we're not just in Nigeria, we're not just in, let's say, a different geography. We cut across Pan Africa, and so then with that, geographically as well from a technology perspective, we're able to sort of look at the ideal transaction and who it serves in that moment in the most affordable way.
Okay. And look, to bring this to you. So, when we talk about innovative technology, I think the technology that your company deploys falls into a very gray area where it's not technically a solar home system or a mini grid, which are the two main technologies that are being currently used to deploy energy in rural sub-Saharan African communities. So, when you describe the model that you use with your mobile power hubs, how do you first present it? And what do you say the unique value it's adding to the ecosystem and more importantly to the communities that the technologies serve?
I think the question of how we reach customers in sub-Saharan Africa with renewable energy is really interesting, and it's a question of meeting customers where they're at with their affordability, with their need for energy, and with what we can meet them with in terms of the technology. And I think the thing that drives mobile power is trying to meet customers where they are today. What are their energy needs today? What is their willingness and ability to pay for that energy today? And what we've found is that that's a very variable spectrum. So in some ways, you could describe us as a wireless mini grid. We deploy a generation asset, solar generation asset in the middle of a community, town, city. We then provide energy to consumers in and around that generation asset. Today, we do it with Mopo 50 batteries and Mopo Max batteries. But there's absolutely nothing from stopping us being able to record how much a particular customer uses and then connecting them with a cable, or indeed partnering with a mini grid company in future and saying this entire community has a willingness to pay and an ability to use a large amount of energy. Let's install a mini grid here. But for us solving this problem, you have to start where we are today. And where we are today is a lot of consumers don't use very much energy. A lot of consumers don't have it as top of their list in terms of things that they need to pay for. There's education, there's food, there's healthcare. Energy is on that list, but it's usually not the top of it. So at Mobile Power, we've really tried to meet the customer where they are. We tried to cut the cost of them getting access to high quality, reliable, renewable energy. and then scale up from there. And I think the reason this partnership with Crossboundary is really exciting is that we can move the customer from what's a relatively small amount of energy all the way through Mopo Max in the future, all the way up to mini grid scale connectivity, and all the way through. And what drives that is creating investable projects. Mobile power makes good returns from day one, and that makes it an investable project. And that means we can leverage capital that's required to create connections across sub-Saharan Africa and grow the economies of those countries. That's where we're.
All right. So to get into the core of the conversation, while we have both of you here, so while I was scrolling through LinkedIn on the 4th of October, an interesting press release went out, and it read Crossboundary Access and Mobile Power closed a $10 million transaction to deploy mobile power hubs in Nigeria and a few other African markets. First of all, congratulations on both sides. I know this is a pretty significant milestone to hit. And what was more surprising about the announcement was this wasn't a mini grid, mesh grid, or solar home system like deployment. This was going to be battery swapping, which until I saw the announcement, I didn't realize there was a big enough market for it, and I didn't realize there was anybody doing it at any significant scale. So from Lynn, I would like to start from you. What was the internal mood at Crossboundary Access when you closed this transaction, and what are you looking forward to this the financing that you've deploying to Move Power? What are you looking forward to it bringing in terms of impact and in terms of data?
Yeah, so I'll start with what was the internal mood. Elation, as you can imagine. Like any other investor across the planet, you want to identify an investable project, you want to identify an investment opportunity that makes sense from a commercial perspective. But in our market specifically, you want something that, one, gives you return, but has impact across the continent. But just to give you context on why this was significant and well received internally within Crossboundary, I need to take you back a bit to get a sense of sort of how we look at projects. So Crossboundary Access was launched back, let's say, in 2019. Yeah. At the time, the work being done was to showcase that mini grids are assets that should be looked at as infrastructure. Previously, there's been a lot of project financing going towards what's defined as infrastructure. We're talking bridges, we're talking dams, we're talking large power plants, but mini grids wasn't necessarily being looked at like that. And so then the very setup of Crossboundary Access was to show that mini grids can be done differently. And so then we were taking an asset class that has been in existence before, but we were saying we can finance it in a way that's innovative, in a way that's different, in a way that allows financing to flow in, give it time to mature, and actually start seeing return in an impactful way. And so then when you take into account that that was the goal, then fast forward to 4th October of 2023, and we're able to apply everything that we've done, everything that we've put into sort of the business model to show that you can finance mini grids differently and apply that to a battery swapping technology. You can only imagine how it speaks to scalability. It shows that because we were financed back in the day by a couple of investors. We're talking Rockefeller Foundation, Shell Foundation, a couple of family offices, Doan and Kenya. So all of the money that went into just proving that, look, within the energy access space, we should also probably look at financing some of these assets differently. That kind of set the tone for us being able to do the deal that was announced on 4th October. So fast forward, we're currently 4th October, we're announcing, we're financing battery swapping technology as infrastructure. You can imagine that proves our concept, that shows the flexibility in our capital, that shows that we see mobile power itself as a long-term collaborative partner who we can actually have either complementary to our business model, but also just as a standalone energy access technology that makes sense for us. So that I'm pretty sure gives you an idea of it's just beyond, it goes beyond us announcing the transaction. It's about this is actually a proven business model, and we get to do, or we finance energy access quite differently. Yes. I think the next Your other question was how we're looking forward to working with mobile power. So, like I already mentioned, Luke with has been an amazing partner. Just negotiations all through. He laughs, but it's true. But then getting a sense of what the mobile power hubs can do, that has been one, like I already mentioned, complementary to our business model, but also makes sense from a commercially viable perspective, but also the impact it can have. We're talking serving energy needs of almost 300,000 people in a way that's not very capex intensive, in a way where deployment can happen a lot quicker. Because as an investor, you're constantly looking for ways to deploy money in an efficient manner. And so then here comes technology that allows you to do that, but also allows you to complement your existing portfolio, such that you can gather information beforehand before you actually have to spend the capex needed, let's say, for mini grids or anything else. So yeah.
And for the listeners of the podcast, you're about to see the beauty of having both sides of the deal in a minute. So, Luke, we're going to jump a bit deeper into the operational side and get a bit into the weeds before we come back up for here. So, I'd like you to talk first about where mobile power sits within the energy ecosystem. So, from the conversation we've had, I understand that mobile power is not just an equipment manufacturer. So, just explain about uh, the way you see yourselves and the way you want to be structured going forward as an organization, and how that brought value to this deal. And then we're going to dump a bit more into some more operational things.
Wow, sounds like we're doing a podcast series. So I'll try and condense that. I think our key insight on day one from our like kind of main founder John O. West and now our chairman was that a lot of consumers in sub-Saharan Africa have the money in their pocket for that day or that week, and they've got to put that money into lots of different things. So healthcare, food, school, and somewhere in that mix is their energy need. They need lighting, or they're slightly wealthier. They need to run a fridge freezer. They need to run their whole compound. But generally, people don't have access to capital very cheaply in sub-Saharan Africa. Lending is expensive, and people tend to have the money in their pocket on that day. So we needed to create an energy distribution system that didn't require long-term debt, that meant that people could rent as much or as little energy as they needed on a daily basis. That was the fundamental beginning of the business. And then you go, okay, well, how do you do that? Well, it turns out you need a little bit of battery technology knowledge. So you start to gather that. Well, it turns out we need a bit of fintech knowledge. So you start to gather that. Then it turns out you need to understand how to build pretty complex software platforms. You hire a few software engineers. Oh, and then we need to manufacture this. Okay, well, we probably need to understand manufacturing. And then before you know it, you have quite a large vertically integrated organization. So once you've manufactured a product and actually got it into the hands of a customer for the first time, we then found that we were very good at building local teams. I think all of the best entrepreneurs that I've ever met live and grew up in sub-Saharan Africa, and so we began to start a process of building an organization to really empower that entrepreneurial spirit that we found alive and well. And then before you know it, you've got a pretty vertically integrated company. But I do think that most successful companies, not just in sub-Saharan Africa, but across the whole continent, tend to be so. I think sub-Saharan Africa is a very exciting place to do business, but it has a very unique set of challenges in terms of there's a lot of crises that happen. There's a lot of currency fluctuations and changes. When you have a vertically integrated company, you can really get into that and build something stable. So for us, doing both sides of that, we found we were able to build something that served customers really well. And when you build something that serves customers really well, you create value for the communities, you create value for the company, and you create value for our partners like Crossboundary.
When it comes to communicating the product and the service to let's just say the regulatory bodies, since it doesn't fit nicely into the two buckets people are familiar with, solar home systems or mini grids, I don't think it falls under any of the current subsidy programs, at least that I'm aware of. But you said before that even without the subsidy programs, that battery swapping is already still a viable model to deploy. So just having that in mind, going into the $10 million investment and the initial 2.25 million upfront that you're getting from that financing, how are you looking to scale that? And is fixing the communication gap that I assume there currently is around the product, is that like a top priority, or how do you see it?
Yeah, I think working with governments is crucial for us, and at the end of the day, we are trying to partner with these communities, which means partnering with countries, which means partnering with governments, and I think governments across sub-Saharan Africa and indeed the global north are doing their best to try and fund this just energy access program globally. We work with a lot of them. And yes, there are subsidy programs out there that we're not always part of, but we are part of some. And I think for us, the customer is always the core. So we're able to do this whilst making money, whilst making investable projects. Not because we're charging customers more, we're actually charging customers a lot less in most cases, but because our cost of capital, our capex costs are much lower. They're much more locally appropriate for the communities that we're engaging in. And that doesn't always just mean cheaper. That means we're able to move and scale that to be with the communities that we're in. So yeah, we're super excited to talk to anybody who wants to talk to us about mobile power in any context. But I suppose the point is we're not dependent on just subsidy programs to make this work. We're dependent on serving customers well. And then we're able to make our business fit with looking after those customers and those communities. Key thing for us is partnership with local communities. We always come in with the community, agree with them where it's going to be built. It's relatively lightweight footprint. It's not a big solar install. It's a pretty tiny solar install on a single building, usually an existing community building, usually with local stakeholders. So for us, it's very lightweight. Takes us less than a week to go from sitting down with that local community to serving the first customer. So yeah, you're right. It's very much about local partnership, and we're looking to do that on every single level.
Mm-hmm. And the initial deployment. So, where the first parts of your business you're looking to hypercharge with the new financing that's coming in from Crossboundary Access?
Yeah, I mean, watch this space. I think we're looking at it. We'll be hopefully announcing some spaces coming soon. But we're already operating in lots of different countries, and I think this is about upscaling that and reaching more customers more quickly. For us, this is really exciting partnership, but it doesn't fundamentally change what we're doing. It just allows us to grow much more quickly, to reach more communities more quickly, and to reach more customers ultimately. And so yeah, we're really excited to be doing hundreds of communities over the next couple of years with this partnership.
Mm-hmm. And Lynn, coming back to you now. So from the mini-grid investments that you currently have and the communities that mobile power can deploy very quickly with much lower capex cost, how are you looking at scaling your current portfolios and them complementing each other? Is it something that you're actively looking at a way to co-develop those communities, or is it something that's still in the early phases right now?
Yeah, so for us, from sort of an immediate path forward, how we see this is we get to deploy mobile power hubs as a standalone, right? Not necessarily in linkage to mini grids per se, but at the same time, we can deploy them in sites that we've already identified. Let's say we would want to put mini grids in future, and we do want to collect some early stage data that allows us that informs us on, let's say, the consumption for households and stuff like that. So both actually work, and we find sit quite comfortably within our portfolio and what we look at, whether it's looking at mobile hubs as a standalone, fully given also the energy need that it serves, or if we look at it from a complementary point, which is since this can be deployed quite quickly, it's fairly capex light. Luke already highlighted the fact that within a week you can have, you can come from sort of having something in a warehouse to something that's fully functional in terms of a mobile hub. If we can have that and gather some early data, then it informs, let's say, where we want to spend heavy capex when it comes to like a mini grid.
Okay. And I know that you both probably want to keep a few cards closer to your chest, but in terms of the next few years, what are the key milestones you're looking to come out of this partnership? What are the key things you're looking in terms of impact, more on the financial side? Just things that we can be excited to look forward to and maybe keep our ears and eyes out for a few more press releases.
I'll go first, and then Lincoln can come in and clean up my mess when I say it far too big. But there are
That's always the case.
there are at least 600 million people on the continent that don't have access to electricity. If you start scaling that up and talking about people who have really poor access to really intermittent electricity, gets even bigger. If you then start talking about the number of people that have access to electricity, but only from expensive petrol or diesel generators, this is a colossal market. And I don't see any blocks to serving these customers and changing the lives of a lot of customers and also a lot of local business people. So for me, this is just the beginning. This first 10 million is about us installing it in a few hundred communities, but there are thousands of communities that we can reach, not just across Nigeria, but across the other countries in which Mobile Power is already operating, and indeed more countries beyond that. We then get to reach those customers for the first time, but then, like Glyn described, upgrade them to larger batteries, upgrade them to mini grids, work with governments to help governments build out grid in appropriate places, and ultimately get this energy thing sorted so that people can start to build their lives and build stable economies, and we can go forwards, and Africa can lead the way in renewables. It can show that the addiction to oil and petrol that the world has struggled with can be changed. And I think that's what I see when I sit down with my colleagues in sub-Saharan Africa, the willingness to do that quickly, flexibly, and in a way that's genuinely innovative. Africa can lead the world on this.
Looks like there isn't much of a mess for me to mop up. It's exactly. No, I echo exactly what Luke just said. And that's exactly also what makes this partnership work. The goal is very much as described. We also see it as electrifying even more people in a profitable manner. With this deal alone, we've already mentioned a couple of times before, we're talking about meeting energy needs for about 300,000 people. So you can imagine, once we identify, let's say, additional synergies or how best to, let's say, grow geographically into other regions and stuff, we very much would be interested in seeing how we can continue that, just electrifying more people in a very profitable manner.
Yes. So two more questions before we wrap up this conversation. So one is for Luke, and then the last one, Lynn, maybe you can go first and then Luke can follow. So Luke, I'm just curious in terms of the impact of the product, because you've explained to me how this works with your people on the ground who are acting basically as entrepreneurs and running these hubs. So what kind of use cases actually do you see from people who are renting out these batteries, and what kind of impact does that make in their lives and their businesses as you've been operating so far and as you're looking to scale up in more communities?
I'll try and be quick, but this is a really wide question. I think one of the great things about Mobile Power when we enter a community is, with a couple of products, we're able to reach generally from the poorest or lowest income person in that community up to the wealthiest in that community. And obviously their use cases differ. So if you're talking about lower income users, they perhaps rent a battery, the Mopo 50, they might rent that once a week, and they charge their phone. Maybe they charge some lights that they've got. Maybe they charge a few neighbors' phones together. But that's kind of the lowest level. And we can serve those customers and we can meet them where they are because they're just renting once a week. So their income matches their usage. Other end of the spectrum, you might have some relatively wealthy people in that town, village, city, and they're renting multiple Mopo Max batteries because they're running AC appliances. They've got big old fans. They've got a giant fridge freezer that they need to run. They've got a big AC TV that they're running. Those customers can rent multiple Mopo Maxes in any given day. And indeed, we do have businesses that rent multiple Mopo Max batteries in any given day. We can reach across that entire community with one lightweight piece of infrastructure and meet all of the energy needs within that community. That same Mopo Max battery then gets used in e-mobility. So we're working with a lot of motorbike taxi riders, Okada riders, or Buddha riders, depending on whether you're in the east or the west of the continent, who are able to dramatically cut the costs of operating their business and do it in a more flexible way. So really, we're a battery technology company facilitating the replacement of petrol, whether it be in a generator, whether it be in a petrol motorbike. And it's about meeting the customer where they're at, whether they're a low-income customer or whether they're, to be honest, relatively middle-class Lagosians, for instance, who need to replace their generator. So our use cases are as wide as our customers.
Yes. And speak more about the agency network as well that you've
Yeah.
set up and why you've chosen to manage that yourselves as opposed to outsourcing that, because many foreign companies especially are very wary about having the large part of your local operational network being managed by them in sub-Saharan Africa.
So what I will say is, in the UK, we have a lot of British guys, but in sub-Saharan Africa, we have about 800 people. 2 of them are expats, and those 2 live in Sierra Leone doing some technology development, working with the UK team. But everybody else that lives in those countries grew up from those countries. The agents in those regions usually grew up in those towns, villages, and cities. The strength of sub-Saharan Africa is its entrepreneurial spirit, is its ability for people to come from nothing and build into something. We are effectively partnering with that entrepreneurial spirit. I think companies have been nervous about that in the past because they've been slow, perhaps, to bring African or staff into those core management roles. We've done it from day one in each and every country that we've been in, and those guys lead us and help us to understand. I think the other strength we have is our technology. So every single customer interaction, every single agent interaction, every single financial transaction happens on our platform. Within our platform, we have a record of it. Every payment to an agent or to one of our staff goes through that, is based upon bonuses, is based upon performance. And so we're really able, through technology, to align the incentive of that local entrepreneur with what we're trying to do as a company or what we're trying to do with our partners like Crossboundary. So I think it's building that into the cultural foundation of the company, using technology to reinforce that, and then making sure that everybody's shooting in the same direction, everybody's got the same incentives, and that builds success. We're able to do that because we understand the technology and we understand the culture. And yeah, that's not down to the founders, that's down to involving people locally early on.
Okay, perfect. And now for the final question of the episode. It might be a bit dark, but I like to think that, let's be honest with ourselves, we work in the off-grid energy space in sub-Saharan Africa. It's a very difficult market to be in, to succeed in. But obviously, we have people like Mobile Power and Crossboundary Access that are supporting the ecosystem, and many other entrepreneurs and businesses and ecosystem enablers. So my question now is, given the risks and challenges that are in the market and just in the world more broadly, how would you define failure in the partnership that Mobile Power and Crossboundary are putting together? Like, what would need to happen to be able to say that, okay, this is what is not going so well? So it's just, how do you define failure from the work that you both are working together on? And then maybe we can get into how you're seeing a bit of the positive side. So maybe then you'd like to go first there.
Well, then that's a hard question.
I'm still thinking about it. So essentially, what would need to happen for us to say this partnership didn't quite work out? Is that it?
Yeah.
I think the very first thing would be if we actually failed to put hubs in the local communities, the very first thing. Like because right now the goal is we've signed, we are all excited to enter into this partnership. We've defined the parameters within which this partnership works. And then imagine we fail to actually put these mobile hubs within the local communities. I think that's a catastrophic case, right? Because then, one, all of the people we've mentioned will be impacted, whose energy needs will be served. Well, that's it, right? The partnership, of course, that's it, because that's literally the very first layer of any progress. We need to actually see these hubs that we've said will be deployed actually deployed within the local communities, because the impact is far-reaching. We are talking about, which I've kept reiterating, serving the rural communities' energy needs. We're talking about creating employment through the agency network that will follow. We are talking about even creating some indirect jobs, right? So if we fail to actually deploy and install all of these hubs that we intend to install, I would say that would be a huge marker of failure within the partnership. The positive side will be, of course, the other side of that coin, which is we actually are able to deploy the initial hubs. As you know, everyone has to, well, not everyone technically, but it's good to date before you marry. You start out with a couple of hubs. I think so.
Marriage advice from Lynn.
You
Excellent. Let's do it.
So you start out with a couple of hubs. You see how those work, you see the impact that it has within the local communities, and then you figure out how to scale that. That's definitely the goal with the partnership.
Yeah.
We're talking from a business model perspective, and I will go as far as to say, even for mobile power, the business model benefits ours as well, because we're here to, yes, make a return, but make a return in a way that is impactful within the communities that we work. We leave people better off than we found them, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. This is a very expensive $10 million first date, but yeah, I agree. I think we go from here. We figure out how to do it, and yeah, we go from there. I'm going to get a lot of stick from the guys in the office because I'm always using dating and marriage analogies to describe deals, but I think it really works. You know, this is a partnership where there are going to be some disappointments. There are going to be some stuff that goes really well. There's going to be stuff that goes really wrong, and I think it's like any marriage. We're going to have to learn to build something together. We've decided to come together to be honest, try and hit a goal that so far nobody's really able to hit, which is creating energy access across a whole continent. So yeah, we're gonna work hard at this, and I think we owe it to our customers, we owe it to our agents, we owe it to our investors, to create something incredible. And failure for me would be us getting petty and thinking this is about mobile power, this is about cross-boundary. It's not. It's about our customers.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I had a really great time speaking with Lynn and Luke and also preparing for this episode. Don't forget to subscribe to the Energy Talk wherever you listen to your podcast, and please share it with a friend or colleague if you did find this valuable. We'll see you again for our last 2 episodes for the rest of the year, and then we close up until January 2024. I thank you so much, everybody who has supported the podcast so far. And like always, this is your host, Olubunmi Olajide, signing off.